Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our Q School Product Spotlight. My name is Guillaume Tremaine, and this is Shannon Markey.
Shannon Markey.
And thank you again for joining. This is the second Product Spotlight that we've done. We'll be doing this weekly and probably until we run out of products. So today we're here talking about the Q Vault and the Q Set, which is a really exciting product line to talk about because it really solves a lot of the issues that are around burial transformers or really all electrical infrastructure in landscape lighting and LED power supplies. You want to talk about some of the problems?
Yeah, we can talk about some of the problems. So this slide shows, basically it's a light fixture. I happened to run by it when I was in Long Beach a few months ago. And being a lighting nerd person, you stop and take pictures of bad installations. But here's something, if you look at it, it shows a lot of the examples of what can happen. Number one is moisture intrusion from all different areas. When you think about installing stuff in the landscape, you're outside in the dirt, could be sand, so there's a lot of issues with materials getting in there. After you install it, the soil can shift. Also, sealing the top correctly during installation is very important. So normally there's some gasketing and screws that do that. Sealing the conduit at any entry points. Also, temperature extremes. These things sit in temperatures of -40. They sit in temperatures up to 120 based on where you might be. And they need to react to that. The other issue is resealing after you open it to maintain it, making sure it gets resealed correctly. Then lastly, in the picture on the bottom left, you'll notice that the bolts a lot of them have been stripped out, so they went in and actually added additional bolts trying to reseal that. So this is a light fixture, but we sell power supplies. So if we go to the next slide, here's a power supply that's suffered some of the same issues. It is watertight, but unfortunately, it holds the water inside as opposed to keeping it outside. So moving on with that, those are some of the issues we tried to address with the Q Vault system. Or Q-scape system, I should say. The product itself is about 12 years old, but I still go out and I show it to people today, and there's a lot of people that haven't seen it, don't know what it's about, and it is a great solution if you want to put something in the ground and have it last for an extremely long time. It is the only solution out there that's IP68.
So we're going to talk about the Q Vault 5, and we'll talk about why it's called the Q Vault 5 in a second. And then we're going to go into the Q Set power supplies and then some of the accessories that go along with the product. The Q Vault 5, I am standing next to the box that would arrive at the job site. So the Q Vault comes in this box, and inside of it is really everything that you need to install the Q Vault and seal it properly. So we have the vault here, and inside of it also comes a drainage pipe, stabilizing bars, and the seal kit. So the Q Vault 5 is called the Q Vault 5 because it's 5 inches wide. So it can accommodate a Q set that is either 2.5 inches or 5 inches. But it's called the Q Set 5 because it's 5 inches wide. The cover, you'll see, is the whole product is a compression mold, not an injection mold. So compression molds are much sturdier than injection molds. The fibers are actually 10 times longer than an injection molded fiber. The cover itself, the standard cover comes in black. You'll see that we have rain gutters right here so that the rain doesn't sit on top of the cover. It can actually drain out. The covers are available in the standard black composite, but we also have bronze or diamond plate stainless steel. So those are available as options as well. The cover itself, inside we have our label, and then we have our spare parts compartment right here built into the cover. The housing, the housing that we're trying, or the issues that we're trying to prevent include water entering the enclosure. So we're trying to seal the door, and then we're trying to seal the primary wiring and then the secondary wiring. So the door seal is probably the most difficult or most challenging part of sealing this enclosure. But any weak link will allow water in, so we're trying to really solve all three of those problems. One of the things that we felt strongly about was developing a gasket that was really over-engineered. This is probably almost 1/4 of an inch thick gasket with a lot of surface area. We did not want a piece of sand or dirt to get under the gasket and jeopardize the integrity of the seal. So we wanted something really with a lot of surface area and would give us a nice seal. One of the issues, though, is that we know our industry, and we know that we couldn't tell the contractors how much torque to put on the bolt. So we wanted to create a way that communicated the gasket was tight. So we developed mechanical compression stops. So these marry up to the door to prevent the contractor or the installer from over compressing the gasket. So that is really a nice feature. The next is that we did not want to mold a nut into the housing here. So we have 2 set screws here that hold a brass nut onto the back of the housing. And so that allows you to get any sand or dirt out of the hole. It doesn't sit in there. But also it allows you to replace the nut or the bolt if you strip it out. Again, going back to the spare parts compartment, we've included a nut and a bolt right here in the cover so that if you do strip out something, you have it at your fingertips. So then we wanted to figure out how to make sure that we had a nice tight seal coming up through the conduit. So we have 4 3/4 inch and 2 1/2 inch NPT fittings. So the idea here is that you're coming up, threading your conduit in, and we have extra deep wells here. So you're coming up with your conduit, your wires are coming up, and we know that conduits are supposed to be sealed, but inevitably they can crack and allow water entry up into the enclosure. So we ship this seal kit with each unit, with each Q-vault, and inside of it, we supply all the material that is necessary to make a nice tight seal. So we've got our installation instructions that say as easy as 1, 2, 3, and then we actually label the steps. So we have step 1, which is a putty, and the putty is designed to actually stuff down into the conduit to act as a stopper. And step 2, again labeled, is a 3M makes a material. It's a reentrable epoxy. It's vegetable-based, non-toxic. It's an A and B compound. You break the center membrane together and you mix the 2 materials together in the bag. 3M's instructions tell you to cut the corner of the bag and drip it into the specific area that you're trying to seal. We tried that and it got all over the place and it wasn't very precise. So we supply a syringe that allows you to suck the epoxy up into the syringe and then get it down into the specific well. We actually even include a cap here so you can suck the epoxy up, get it down into the specific well. If you're not using all of it, you can put the cap on and use the remainder for later. It congeals into the consistency of like hard Jell-O, so that if you do need to get back in there, you can. You can pick it out with the screwdriver. You would have to reapply the reentrable epoxy, but it does give you the ability to get back in there and work on it if you need to. We do include a last step, which is a desiccant bag, so that if you're installing this in a humid day or a rainy day, it sucks up the residual moisture so that it's not sitting down inside the enclosure. We also include some important things. We have our stainless steel bolts. We also have a wiring or a template for holes to drill out in the unit, which Shannon will talk about in a minute. And we have wire ties, a silver Sharpie, which allows you to write your any information you want on your lighting loads right here on the cover or in the unit. And we have small screws for your stabilizing bars, so you can actually mount the stabilizing bars here and then in the front and prevent the enclosure from coming out of the ground. And then we also have a T-hex tool built into the enclosure. So so we've discussed how to seal the door and the primary wiring coming out. The secondary wiring we're going to talk about in a minute, but we've addressed that in a variety of different ways. One other thing that we include, I apologize, is the drainage pipe. This is not part of our UL listing or our IP68 listing, but it does help with the drainage of the unit. So it's an extra safety device or extra precautionary device that we include in the unit. The other thing is that we have a concrete pour ring or a lawnmower guard. So those are two options that are available. Obviously the concrete pour ring is for when you're pouring it into concrete, but the lawnmower guard is to really prevent the unit from getting damaged in heavily landscaped areas.
Perfect. So with that, that's the vault. So what goes inside of it are power supplies, which we call Q sets. So the Q sets basically are 2.5-inch wide or 5-inch wide cassettes. So inside of there, we're going to either put magnetic transformers, a toroidal transformer, or we're going to put electronic power supplies. So that's the options that you can get. So we'll go through what those options are. When you look at it, you'll notice when you look at a normal standard product, you don't see any bolts or screws. And the reason for that is it's completely sealed with epoxy internally. Depending upon what we put in it, we then seal it and clamp it so that it's all held together by that epoxy. So what that epoxy does is if I installed the box and I didn't follow those 3 instructions and somehow water got in there, water can fill up all the way to the very top of the power supply without any negative effects on the transformer itself. So there's a little added protection there. The unit itself, here is one that's we're going to show that is actually sealed completely. So this is half sealed just to show you how that is. So inside there, as I mentioned, either a toroid, which is a magnetic transformer. We do those in AC output. A lot of the traditional landscape fixtures still require 12-volt AC. We also do them in DC output, where we'll add an additional bridge rectifier in there to change that output to DC for LEDs. So with that, either of those are available. And then we also do them with 1 or 2 electronic drivers in there, and those again are sealed in epoxy. And the epoxy helps actually make the electronic drivers operate cooler than they would normally. So it actually can help extend the life of those electronic drivers. Our typical enemies are both moisture and heat. So with that, we kind of accomplish both of those in one shot. The housings themselves, the cassettes, they have a nice handle. So that handle allows a contractor to pick it up and carry it around. If you were to get one of our Q-Set 2 or 3s, which are extremely heavy, this one will go up to 750 watts. We also have one that will go up to 900 watts AC. If you were to pick these up, they probably weigh, I would guess that weighs 60 pounds or 70 pounds, yet the handle is still good and sturdy. As far as installing them in the box, when a contractor is going to install them, we try to make sure one of the most important things is your wiring connections. So with the unit itself, we have little flippers on here that you just kind of flip that out, and it sits up on a rail. That allows the contractor to make his wiring connections above the ground. So he's not trying to reach down into a box and make those wiring connections. He's actually making them above the ground in a comfortable position. When you're done, you lift it up, drop it down into the box. So with that, if you look at the tops of the units, if I can get these out here where you can see them, I have an AC unit and I have a DC unit. So you'll notice that the AC unit, we have multiple taps on the secondary. So that allows us to send the voltage further down the wire, do longer runs with smaller gauge wires. So we actually start at 11 volts and go up through 15 on a 12-volt transformer. So that allows us to boost that up so that the voltage at the end of the line is what it should be and compensates for that voltage drop. On the primary side, we also have a boost tap if you're going to dim it. Whenever you dim, you lose about 5% of your primary voltage. So what that does is that boosts that back up so you don't have a loss of voltage on the primary side coming into the power supply. The DC units are going to have outputs here, either 1, 2, or 3 outputs. So those outputs are color-coded to so the wire that we actually use, our wire, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But each one of these is going to be your 4 amp output of 24 volts, limited to class 2. So slightly different on the top, but the same functionality. If you look at a magnetic transformer, we're going to have a primary protection. So we have a circuit breaker here on the front. We're going to have secondary protection. Those breakers are in a watertight boot so that they're waterproof. And then if it blows, you can reset that. Or if you want to service something, you can literally open this up, pull that up, turn off the power, do some service, come back and turn it back on without having to run to, back to the distribution box or something like that. On the cassettes themselves, a couple other things, features. Number one, this is a primary and this is a secondary. Primary is your high voltage power. So the primary is isolated in its own chamber so that no one can get in there and touch it without opening it up. Here we have a nice little Allen tool. You'll notice that the Allen is extra long compared to a standard Allen. The reason for that is the lugs. So if we get into the terminal blocks, the terminal block we use is a 50 amp rated terminal block made out of stainless steel. So the reason that it's 50 amps, or the most power we can send through here by code, is 25 amps on an AC output or 4 amps on a DC output. So with that, they're overrated, but they're also extra deep so that you can get your wires in there and get multiple wires. A lot of times you'll do multiple runs to different locations with low voltage. So I can shove a lot of different wires in there, and then I can crank that down with an Allen. We use that instead of a Phillips or a flathead screw so it won't strip out. But also, if you look down on it, you'll notice there's 2 holes. So we use 2 lugs instead of 1. So that allows me to get the wires in there deeply, tighten it down with this device, or if I'm not happy with that, we also have the T-Allen that comes in the bag of goods inside the Q-Vault. So that's the terminal block. Now to get into the primary, I merely take that off. I unscrew these 2 screws here, slide that off if my dexterity is working today. So get this to come off here. So once that comes out, I have a strip gauge on there. So with the strip gauge, that tells me how deep our terminal block is. So I strip my wires correctly so they are completely in there. I don't end up with shorting or arcing, and both lugs will tighten down on that wire that's inside the terminal block. I also have a piece of waterproof paper in here, and that allows me to write any circuit notes or something like that. If I want to write what circuit this is or what area it's feeding, it's a waterproof paper. I can slide that in there and I can easily identify where that is going. There's also some small holes here, and in the bag of goods, you also get some wire ties, so it just helps you with some wire management within the housing. You can tie those wires off neatly with the wire ties that we provide. On here, you will notice this here I have a hot, a common, and a ground. If I were to open up the one that's a AC unit, you're going to have a hot, a neutral, and a ground, but you're also going to have that boost tap to boost that power up if you're using a dimmer. So those are the cassettes. As I mentioned, in a housing, we can put 2 of these side by side, which are 2.5 inches wide each, or we can use one of the larger ones for AC. So when you look at the power that's available, if I can go back to that slide for a second. So QSET 1, 2, or 3, that is just how many secondary breakers are on the unit. So a QSET 1 is always going to be 2.5 inches wide. QSET 2 has 2 secondary breakers. QSET 3 has 3 secondary breakers, and that's up to 900 watts. The QSET E-LED we can do in 12 volt or 24 volt, and we can do either 60 watts to 120 watts in 12 volt or 100 or 200 watts, so in a electronic. When you look at the QSET M-LED, that is using the toroid versus with a DC rectifier on there as opposed to the electronic power supply. So the benefit with that toroid is there is no real low-end temperature rating on it, so you can operate it in very cold temperatures. It also comes with a 10-year warranty instead of a 5-year warranty with our electronics. And lastly, the expected life of a toroid is about 70 years. So if you want a product that's really going to last a long time, the toroid is probably your best bet.
Yeah, one other thing that I just wanted to mention, and I don't know if you mentioned it, Shannon.
I may not have.
The E LED and the M LED are also 2.5 inches wide, and you can fit 2 of those inside the enclosure as well, side by side. So you can fit up to 400 watts of electronic LED inside of one QVault 5. The next issue that we realized existed was around the low voltage wire. And the low voltage wire that has been used in the industry and is still used in the industry was really designed for landscape irrigation. The issue with the wire is that you can see we were comparing Q wire versus standard wire. So the standard wire is shaped like speaker wire, so it's really easy to pull those 2 conductors apart, but you can't seal the valley between the 2 conductors. The wire, the standard wire, is only rated for 60 degrees Celsius. Most lighting fixtures operate over 60 degrees Celsius. And then the wire itself is bare copper, which will oxidize over time. And the color of the wire is difficult to conceal, especially when you're running the wire up a tree. So we've addressed all of those issues. We've made our wire flatter so you can make a nice tight seal to the wire. We've rated the wire for 90 degrees Celsius versus 60 degrees Celsius. The wire itself is tin coated, so it's like marine grade wire. And then we color coded the internal jackets, yellow and blue, to marry up to our terminal blocks. So it's very easy to make the determination of where you're landing those wires. And then the outside of the jacket is colored gray on one side or brown on the other side. A lot of trees are, the color of the bark is either gray or brown, so it's easy to conceal the wire going up a tree. There are not a lot of black bark trees out there. So this is a great solution. It's available in 14 gauge, 12, or 10 gauge, and then with the ground it's available in 12 too. This wire is not only rated to be used outdoor, but it's also rated to be used in a single dwelling residential application. So it's basically stranded Romex, which is very convenient when you want to run stranded wire indoor. So the final issue that we saw was how to bring the wire in and out of the enclosure with a good compression fitting. And did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure, why not? I'll keep the housing there for a second.
All right.
So coming in and out of the housing, we bring our line voltage up through the bottom typically, through conduit. But you also have a way if you want to bring the low voltage out of there. But if you imagine you place this in the ground today, you may come back and do your wiring out to your fixtures a week later, 2 weeks later. So in the kit, we included the template, which is in here somewhere. So we include a template. And basically, based on where you're going to enter that, you would take that template, you'd put off the sticker, you put it on there. And thanks to our friends at the Spirograph company, it shows you exactly where to drill based on the size of the connector that you want to use. So once I'm going to, based on that connector size, they're all color coded, I'm going to drill in those specific points. So with the connectors themselves, we do them in plumbing thread, and we also do them in machine thread. So the difference between the two, plumbing thread will have a gasket and a bolt, and that will go into the conduit. The machine thread will actually come through the side of the housing. So if I wanted to take this one, I could thread it into the appropriate conduit entry, and I could come in or out of the bottom. Or if I want to come out of the side, I put on my template, I drill my hole, I can come out of the front or the side. And then with this, it has two nuts and 2 washers, one for the inside, one for the outside of the housing. I seal those together. To bring the wire out, I'm going to pull this out, and we have a variety of inserts as well based on the wire gauge size that you're using. So basically, if I want to use 3 of those, I would take those 3 enclosures out, or those 3 plugs. I would run my wires through there, and then I would put that in there. I would tighten it down, and they're called Q-clicks because they click and lock, almost like a locking washer. So now that is locked in place, and the wires are completely sealed. So when I'm done, this is kind of what it would look like when it's done. I got my wires coming into the housing here, and I got my wires going out to my different loads there. So if we go back to the insert screen there, As you can see, we do them in a variety of sizes. So red is a 1/2 inch, blue is 3/4, white are 1 inch, the yellow is 1.25. As I mentioned, you don't have to use all of the wire holes that you have. You can leave those plugs in there and it'll seal just like it's got wire in it. And the last question we always get is, do I have to use your wire? Not necessarily. If you want to do the job right, we prefer our wire because of all the good qualities it has. But if you are using landscape wire, if you can go back to the slide one more time, you'll notice that we have 2 inserts, the insert portion of it. Oh, inserts, there we go. On the top left, you'll see 2 of them that in the 3/4 inch size that have 2 holes. So that is designed for traditional landscape wire, be it 10 gauge or 12 gauge. You're going to pull the conductors apart, run each one through its own hole so you no longer have a valley, and tighten that down and it'll seal just like it would with our Romex shaped wire. We have what we call the Q-scape system, because it really is a system, and any weak link within that system will cause things to eventually break down.
And in addition to what you saw today, we have our Q-Trix and Q-Hex products. We wanted to keep this, this whole series of spotlights under 30 minutes, so we will probably add a spotlight on the Q-Trix and the Q-Hex, along with some other products that go along with our Q-scape offering. Do we have any questions?
Somebody had a question about being dry. It is not drive over rated. You could put it in a walkway. We do have the concrete pour ring for it, but it is not drive over rated for vehicles.
So the question was, are the bolts on the concrete pour ring removable? They are not. You have to order one version or the other version.
My clients are asking for DMX. How would you do it in the Q vault?
Funny you would ask that question. So we have a hidden device called a mounting plate. So with this mounting plate, it sits in the cassette or in the Q vault, just like you normally would put in in the cassettes, but it allows you to put in a variety of different, be them ours or somebody else's power supplies. So with the mounting tray, we can mount them on the bottom, we can mount them on the top. This one has a power supply with a DMX decoder on the top. We also have done some custom ones with some other devices where we didn't use this tray and we assembled those. So if you run into an issue where you need something like that, this is obviously not sealed in epoxy because you got to get access to it to program it like the others are, but it can sit right in there inside of an IP68 rated box and serve the same purpose. So that is an option. It is a mounting tray. Just work with your local rep or your rep, work with our customer service people to call that out, because I don't even think we have a catalog number for it.
So one other thing to add to that is everything that we showed you today, the power supplies are constant voltage. If you ran into a situation where you needed a constant current power supply, this is also a good solution. So I just wanted to add that.
So lastly, all of our reps, and if there's reps on the phone that do not have a sample of this, you should order them. My suggestions is you should have a sample of this, so if anybody ever needs to show it to a client, it's really something that it seems relatively boring when you talk about it, but people are usually fascinated by all the thought that has gone into the product to make it watertight. In addition to that, if you are ordering samples, I would order these as dummy cases. That means we don't put anything inside of them since you can't see it anyhow. And it really cuts down on the weight as you have to lug those around from account to account to account. They get a little heavy. So with that, also you should have samples of Q-clicks and connectors and all of that as well.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.